Okay? So this person here, Max, works about 16 hours a day and comes home with something in the neighborhood of $250. But he does work overtime because he's to the right of 16. So this is first year management consultant, lawyer, doctor, assistant professor, anything like that, where you just work crazy hours. The only difference for many of these professions is you don't actually get paid overtime. We should start doing that at the university. I'm joking. Okay. Well, my friend Kevin, who's a really cool guy, maybe the smartest guy I know, big Texan dude. He's now a professor at Oxford. Most unlikely person to make the faculty at Oxford is my real Texan friend Kevin, and he now sits there in the Harry Potter outfits at high table at the end of the day, right? So Kevin does not work overtime, even though he does in real life. So now what I want to do is, if I gave Kevin the same sort of wage structure, I offered him this deal where for the first 8 hours you get $10 an hour, and for the next 16 hours you get $20 an hour. That means he faces the exact same budget constraint. But what I want for Kevin to not choose to work overtime. So again, same budget constraint as before. If he works a 24-hour day, he gets $400. So where does Kevin have to be if he doesn't work overtime? Well, overtime is anywhere to the left of here, so Kevin has to be to the right of here. So the indifference curve that's consistent with Kevin not working overtime is one that looks something like this. There's a number of ones you could draw that are all correct. I'm just choosing to draw this type. Ooh, bad indifference curve. Let's try that again. Much better. Okay, this Kevin right here works about 5 hours per day. The real Kevin works 5 hours before breakfast, but let's just make a counterfactual Kevin, all right? But what I'm saying here, and I think this is this message that comes through over and over again when we talk about how people make choices, consumption choices, it just depends on your preferences. They're facing the same sort of rules, right? The same scarcity here, the same budget constraint, and Max may choose to work a lot more than Kevin, and it just depends on their preferences. It depends on the ratio of how much additional utility you get out of working another hour versus having another dollar to spend on football tickets. Granted, Max, in his lifetime, has spent exactly $0 on football tickets. I've spent a lot of dollars on soccer tickets, but that's a different story. Okay, so Max, this is all very cute. I'm enjoying it. I like labor. Somebody came up to me and said something about my Marxian roots, you know. So we all love, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, talking about labor gets everybody excited. So let's talk about something that gets everybody angry. Tax, right? Tax, unfortunately, has become a totally dirty word. You'd have a hard time finding a politician that gets excited about taxing people, because do voters like being taxed? No. The only thing voters seem to like at this point is taxing the 1%, because there's just 1%, right, versus 99%. So just nobody knows those guys. But Robert Reich has a much more eloquent way of expressing this particular political economy conundrum. He even made a movie about it. So let's just take a very simplistic way of thinking about taxes in this particular framework and see if we can say something quasi-intelligent about what tax policy could or maybe even should look like. So what we haven't really distinguished yet is what's wage, right? How many dollars do you see when you go home? Right? You take your paycheck with you, and if you're paid a nominal wage of $10 an hour, how many dollars do you actually see that you can spend on soy lattes? Fewer dollars, right? Stuff gets subtracted. So let's make a really, really simple world where there's some sort of payroll tax or an income tax, and we're going to argue that that tax here is one where a percentage of your wage is simply taken, and the government collects it, and the government does things with it like provide public goods. We will talk about public goods and why the government should do it, right? National defense, public radio, then 45 cents on the arts, and ever less so on education, but I'm not being sarcastic. And then it takes some of these dollars and redistributes them, right? We could talk about social welfare functions and about how well off individuals in the society should be, and Alan Karras and Bev Crawford and people like that talk about that quite a bit. But how well off is a society? Is this as well off as the happiest individual in the society? Is this as well off as the least happy individual in the society, or some other measure? So there's been a lot of discussion about how much we should redistribute wealth from the wealthier people to the not so wealthy ones, and what the right answer is there. I'm not going to talk about that, right? Because I know nothing about that. It's not a question that an economist is very good at answering. We're very good at measuring inequality, but how much redistribution should take place, that's fundamentally, I don't think, a question that economists are very well suited to answer. Some of my colleagues would, of course, disagree with me on that. But what happens to your take-home wage as taxes go up? Goes down, right? The higher the percent that the government keeps for whatever it does with it, doesn't really matter, but the higher the tax rate, the lower your wage, right? Do we know how to draw what happens to a budget constraint as wage increases or decreases? Yeah, we do, right? So instead of thinking about wage increases as just nice bosses that want to give us more money per hour because they like us and they also went to Cal, right? We could think of wage increases as tax cuts. If taxes get cut, you have more take-home wage. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to think about briefly what that would look like in terms of our budget constraint, and then think about what that would do to our labor supply. So start with I've got the wrong pen here. Start with a budget constraint here. Budget constraints are now black again here. Okay, so this first budget constraint, W, and let me stick with the notation I came up with as a good one, W star 1 is 1 minus tau 1 W. What are you talking about here, Max? I'm saying this budget constraint here is a budget constraint where the government keeps tau 1, tau is just fancy Greek for T, all right, tau 1% of your take-home, of your nominal wage. So if the government keeps 25% of your wage, tau 1 is 0.25, and the take-home wage, W1 star, is 0.75 of whatever your nominal wage is, right? So if you make $10 an hour, the government keeps 25%, W is 10, T1 is 0.25, and W1 star is $7.50, okay? That's the first budget constraint. Now, let's say that the government cuts taxes. W2 star is 1 minus tau 2 W. What are you doing? There we go. I'm looking forward to that new app. Okay, so if I want to talk about a wage increase, does the government have to cut or increase taxes? Cut taxes, right? We like tax cuts because our wages go up. So tau 2 is smaller than tau 1. Let's think of our third one. Let's go really crazy, where taxes are cut really, really high. So tau 1 is greater than tau 2 is greater than tau 3. So you start at some initial tax rate, let it be 75%, then you cut it to 50%, then you cut it to 25%. What happens to my take-home wage is it goes up twice. Okay, so after my first tax cut, this is what my budget constraint looks like. And after I didn't whine. I'm proud of myself. I'm growing as a person. It's important. So you have two sequential tax cuts. So let's just make clear what these things are here. So the slope of this thing here is minus W1 star. The slope of this thing is minus W2 star. And the slope of this thing is minus W3 star. Right? If you give up 1 unit of labor to gain 1 more unit of leisure, you're giving up W1 star dollars. So you're giving up less real income than you do here, right, after the tax cut, and you're giving up even more income up here under the really low taxes. So what happens, right? It depends on your preferences. There are many, many different ways you could think about this. We could draw 3 different indifference curves, and this is just one individual. Let me just look at my cheat sheet here to make sure I do this right. Oh, this is a beautiful thing. All right. So the first indifference curve, I'm going to tell you that I want to land here, so I'm going to cheat a little bit. Then I want to land really far out here, and then I want to come back a little bit, okay? It's always nice to figure out where you want to land with your indifference curves and then draw them, instead of drawing your indifference curves and then starting to swear like I do. If you need some German swear words, I'm happy to pass them on to you. They're very satisfying, right? Almost had it, and then I panicked. Okay. You want to see this is how I cheat, okay? You can pretend that you're all cool. I know guys who can do that, right? They're like Olympians of economics. They just draw this stuff in its tangent. You cheat a little bit. It's okay with indifference curves. You start at where you want to be, and you draw an indifference curve that comes out, and then, oops. See, now I just screwed up the end part, so if I hit undo, it doesn't undo the whole thing. That looks better. For the second one, again, cheat just a little bit. And for the third one, make sure that you don't, by mistake, start coming underneath here. All right? If you end here, or if you fit a straight line through, and I can see if you drew them straight, they'd cross, I'm not going to punish you. But if you draw one that comes below the top one, right? I know this one has to flatten out, so they'll cross. So just let them all end at roughly the same x value, and you're going to be okay. So what do I have here, right? This individual at the really low take-home wage works really little, right? Works about 5 hours. Then you cut taxes, and that individual starts working something like 11 hours right here at that higher wage rate. Then you cut taxes again, right? And you make their hourly wage much higher, and all of a sudden they go back to working less again. Weird, huh? For example, if you look at the income level, the take-home income that this individual has between the last 2 wage rates that we're looking at here, is that very different? So I can draw almost a straight line through here. I'm going to make it go away in a second, but think about the income level for the last 2 bundles. Right, I can almost draw a straight line through that. What does that mean for me? At the medium level of income and the high level of income, how much take-home money do these people have? Same amount, right? So what this individual does here is, here you work very little and you're poor. Now you have a good amount of take-home income. You're managing to pay all your expenses. You pay your car lease payment, your mortgage, your taxes. You send your kids to school. Everybody's drinking soy lattes. And then your hourly wage goes up again. And you're looking at yourself and you're saying, all my expenses are paid. I'm doing all right. I can't drink any more soy lattes. You can't eat money. But what I can do is I can spend more time with my kids and lovely partner, right? So I'm going to cut back my hours a little bit, and it's really nice that I'm not even going to take an income hit. One set of preferences, right? We could have easily drawn another set of preferences for somebody whose tangency is up here, right? Somebody whose tangency is up here, that with a third wage increase would go to working even more. It just depends upon your preferences. So Max, why'd you draw those weird preferences? Do you have an agenda? Are you paid by a big-time think tank to tell us that, low taxes are going to do something? No, right? I'm not paid by anybody except for some of my wage comes from the state government, and a lot of it comes from places I don't know, universities, you guys, right? I know exactly where it comes from. But the point here is, as wage increases, you increase hours worked, and then you decrease hours worked. Odd. What does that mean? Well, I'll tell you. I wrote this down to remind myself to slow down. So think about an income tax in the way I've written it here, which just takes a fraction of your wage out, which is pretty reasonable. An income tax is similar to a wage decrease. So if your labor supply is upward sloping everywhere, right? What happens if I cut taxes? So if labor supply is just a line that looks like this, what was hours worked was H, right? If I keep on cutting taxes, what are you going to do? So if I keep on cutting taxes, what happens to your wage? Goes up and up and up. As your wage goes up and up and up, what are you going to do? Work more and more and more and more, right? So if labor supply is upward sloping like this, the higher the wage, the lower taxes, the more you're going to work, right? That's one way of looking at the world. Well, there's another model. If labor supply bends backwards, it's upward sloping for a while, and then it comes around back to where it came from at higher wages. Then, at really low wages, right? If I increase your wage, you're going to supply more and more labor. But at some point, you're reaching that soy latte point where you just don't want to spend more money. The marginal utility of leisure time is much, much higher than the marginal utility of income. And what's happening is you're cutting back your hours worked, right? So this here is, if we ignore this top part here, these two graphs look the same. But there's some evidence that as wages go up, people actually cut back the hours they want to work. Question? Great question. I love it. That's exactly the next slide. Okay. So Max, I get this. This is how you started your lecture. And I'm sorry I keep on talking to myself, but it's a very efficient way of communicating with myself. So this is labor supply right here. We get this, right? Higher wages, lower taxes, people work more. Where does this thing come from? Well, we've seen this before, something similar, right? Where I told you a good can be normal at low levels of income and inferior at higher levels of income, so you can get this backward bending angle curve. But this here is different, right? It's also a backward bending curve, but I'm not shifting, changing the prices of both goods here. I'm just changing the price of one good instead of changing the price of leisure. And I'm getting this weird backward bending labor supply curve. Where does it come from, Max? Not well organized. Okay, let me convince you that I just showed you exactly that, and I just want to get you to practice drawing these curves. I'm going to draw the exact same thing I just drew, okay? One, no. Budget constraints. I'm forcing you to practice while we're all together. It's an expensive way to practice, but let's do this again, okay? What I need for my backward bending labor supply is I need a scenario where as I cut taxes and wages go up, labor supply goes up, and then as I increase wages again by cutting taxes again, labor supply goes down. Well, here I've got a point A, right? That's my beginning point. I cut taxes and my budget constraint rotates up because the wage goes up that I see going home, and my optimal amount of labor supply goes up, right? So I've got indifference curves that look exactly like what I just showed you, right? Something like this. And then, as wage increases again, if I cut taxes again, now all of a sudden this individual works less, so it goes from point B to point C. Okay, so you essentially go from point A number of hours to point B number of hours, and then from point B numbers of hours to point C number of hours. You see what I'm saying? This thing wants to draw out where I put the pen. Okay, so you go from A to B, tax cut. First tax cut, you work more. Then you cut taxes again, and you go from B to C. You increase your labor supply, and then you decrease your labor supply as wages increase. That's exactly the backward bending labor supply. So if you plot your wages, your after-tax wages against hours worked in a picture, it looks something like this, right? We started with, and this is not drawn to scale, so don't panic. We started with a low wage, then we cut taxes, gave the person a higher after-tax wage, and then we cut taxes again, and we gave the person an even higher after-tax wage. Okay, so this here is tau 1 is tax, this here is tau 2 is the tax rate, and this here is tau 3 is the tax rate. And this here is W1 star, W2 star, W3 star. So at the low wage rate, you work a few hours. After the first tax cut, you increase your hours worked. And after the sequential second tax cut, you decrease your hours worked. So this thing looks something like that, a backward bending labor supply curve. Pretty cool, huh? I like it. But Max, answer me some questions, please. Why on earth should I care? Right? This is the single most important question you should ever ask. This is interesting, but why should I care, or why is this important? Well, if you look into sort of the history of public economics in the United States, right, we actually went from incredibly high marginal income tax rates to really, really low marginal income tax rates. Right? Tax rates have come down quite a bit over time. So think about what happens here. Let's say you're a young president, right? Your name happens to be John F. Kennedy. You just moved into the White House. I just saw a movie, The Butler, with Oprah, and it was really neat, I thought. You see all the presidents. It's a great film. I learned a lot about this country where I wasn't born. So I highly recommend it. It was not nominated for anything, I think, but it was cool. So young John F. Kennedy moves into the White House and has really, really high marginal income tax rates for the highest earners. So at that point, the highest marginal income tax rate was 91%. Right? That doesn't mean everybody paid 91%. It just says if you earned a lot of money, 90% of that highest share of your income, that highest share of your income was taxed at that rate. So taxes were really, really high. So Kennedy cuts taxes. And what happens? So he cut taxes from 91% to 70% for the highest earners, and some other brackets as well. And what happened is people actually started working more. Right? Taxes were really high, after-tax wages increased, and people started working more. Now there was another president, Reagan, who took over. I can't remember if it was 50 or 30. No, it must have been 50%. I'll get you the right number here. I can't read my handwriting here. So Reagan comes in, cuts taxes again from, let's say, 50% to 28%. And what happened? Labor supply actually fell. Right? So this is actually consistent, and we could argue in what section of society and what industries and so on. Go talk to Barry Eichengreen and Brad DeLong. They know this stuff cold. But the point here is if you look at the Kennedy record, sort of superficially what you see is tax cuts, meaning take-home wages increase and people worked more. Reagan, who started from a higher after-tax wage rate, lower tax rate, cuts taxes again, and hours worked actually went back. Of course, the overall story is much, much more complicated. Right? Can you just change how many hours you work by the hour? No. Right? You either work a job or you don't work a job, and it comes with a certain number of